Welcome to Kisima Radio, your heart-to-heart communication. You are with your host, Ulisa Ngyadibani, and with our returning guest, Pastor Lutando Tofu, who's going to be touching on visionary leadership and the optical capacity of a visionary leader. Welcome, Fundis. You can just take us back a bit on what a visionary leader is and how it connects to the optical capacity of a visionary leader.
Yeah, I think on our last episode, we spoke quite extensively around the issue of visibility as it affects the vision of a leader. And that visibility is an aspect that is external from me as a leader, but one that affects how I see and view things. And we spoke quite in depth on the importance of the ability of a leader to have belief systems. Though they may not originate from me internally, but belief systems are what enable me to translate my environment. And so we were speaking quite extensively on how a visionary leader is one who helps other people see through belief systems, through values, through ideologies, through whichever way you might want to frame it. But that's a language that helps other people to see and translate the world. And visionary leaders excel, not necessarily in establishing projects or whatever, but in establishing belief systems and being able to communicate those and convey those and allowing people to see with the same perspective that they hold within themselves. So we're going to tie that up today with the optical capacity of the leader.
Yes.
But that was a very important and fundamental aspect of when we're talking a visionary leader. We're not necessarily talking somebody who duplicates projects that they've seen. We're talking about somebody who holds deeply held belief systems and is able to effectively communicate those and transfer those to other people. And so when we move now into optical capacity, we are now talking about something that originates within the visionary leader, their capacity to see. And there's a couple of things that I want us to touch on that.
Wonderful. We are saying that as a leader, you see where you're going and have that optical capacity. However, how do you get the people that are following you and the part of the church to be part of that and to follow through? How do you ensure consistency? What they are there, they are following, they are catching your vision.
So one of the critical aspects in leadership in general is that leadership is your ability to influence others, to be able to see, view, speak, do as you do.
Wow.
And so when we're talking about a leader, we're not talking about somebody who would be a leader. We're talking about somebody who's functioning as a leader. Whether you are leading one person, 2 people, 5 people, 20 people, doesn't really matter, as long as there are people who are learning from you, who are gaining from you, and who are getting a sense of direction from you. Then you are a leader one way or another. You may be a child, you may be a grown up, but then that ability, that leadership ability needs to be developed further. And so what we're now talking about is crafting and forming a different type of leadership, or a certain type of leadership under the banner of kingdom leadership. So in other words, some people will say leaders are born and not made. Some will say leaders are made and not born. Either way, I think both are valid, because you might be born with the ability to influence, but how you do that and for what end do you do that, I think that's the forming part that becomes critical in your leadership journey.
Wonderful. Talking about the optical view, how do as a leader, do you get your vision into a certain content and go through with it and ensure that those that are with you are following through? What is required for you to be effective optical capacity visionary leader?
Yeah. So when we are touching about the optical capacity, remember last episode we spoke about that visibility is the illumination of the environment around me in order for me to see. So now when we're talking about the optical capacity, we're talking about the functioning of my eye in order to see. And so when we're talking the optical capacity is It's the I's ability to adjust and to adapt to the environment. And so even when there's illumination, even when there's no illumination, but whether you walk outside and it's daylight or you walk outside and it's night, the eye in itself, the way it's designed, is designed such that it adapts to whatever contrasts in light that there may be. So it speaks of adaptability. And I think that's a very critical aspect in leadership, especially in visionary leadership. Visionary leaders are people who adapt easily. They are not swayed and they are not changed to become something else, but they change themselves and form themselves to adapt to the environment. And so I want us to touch on a couple of things on that.
Please.
And the first one is that there is a common language now that's being used around leadership gurus and so forth, and they actually talk about a leader not being able to master one type of leadership style, but being able to master all of them such that you are able to apply a leadership style as the situation requires. And that's adaptability. So I may myself be an autocratic leader, but then I come into a context where my kind of leadership style is not needed. So what makes me a good leader will be my ability to adapt to that environment.
All right. Mfundisi, in the context, adaptability when it comes to leadership, what is needed? What is the missing link that we need?
Yeah, I think this issue of adaptability is a very critical one. Whether you are leading a church organization, whether you are leading a non-governmental organization, a company for that matter, any company that does not evolve itself post how and when it began has a risk of dying out, because there are various factors that affect any organization for that matter, and that has to do with the times changing, times society changing, and all of that. So as a leader, as a visionary leader, it becomes a very important tool for you to have, that you must be adaptable, or else you die out, or you become irrelevant, and so forth. So I want us to look to zoom a little bit into that, because even in church structures, what is first becoming a problem in the church is that the church is not adaptable enough to the changes that are happening in society. And therefore, the generations that emerge are beginning to say the church is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant because it does not have leaders in place. It's irrelevant because it does not have adaptable leaders in place. And so what does then that mean for me as a leader, or somebody who views myself as a visionary leader? And I want to touch on three things regarding that. And because what enables you to adapt is how you develop your internal capacity. That's why we're talking about optical capacity. In other words, it's your ability, it's your developing ability to improve your sight. And so one of the fundamental things that is important there is the ability to study, ability to learn.
Yes.
Three things on that. One is that as a leader, as a visionary leader, you have to be the primary student of yourself. You have to know yourself better than other people know you. In other words, you have to be a student of who you are, because you can't develop your weaknesses, nor can you understand your limitations unless you learn yourself, unless you study yourself, unless you are thorough in understanding who you are and who you can be. So the first layer when we're talking about the ability to study, there is the layer of learn yourself, know yourself very well.
Yes.
The second one is the ability to study the context, because you are leading within a context. You are not leading in a vacuum, you are leading within a context. It becomes important for you to be a student of the context in which you are in. Whether you are in politics, or whether you are in student ministry, whether you are in church ministry, but give yourself time to learn the environment, the context in which you are in. And so the interesting thing is that when you when you put together visibility and the optical capacity, you get something very interesting, which is you develop the ability to see detail. Detail becomes visible to you.
Crystal clear.
I might be looking at something or this phone at night, I won't see its detail because the visibility is not there. But once you combine my optical ability with visibility, then I can see detail. Then when I see detail, I can respond in detail. And so when you gear yourself to study your context, most preachers, that's part of their problem, is that they preach the God of the Bible, which is correct, but they are preaching the context of the Bible without the application of their immediate context. And so you would hear people talking about emphasizing in their entire church movement, the emphasis is on women and them dressing modestly and dressing without even understanding what that context was about, nor understanding what this context requires. So you have to be a person who moves in between the biblical context and the modern context and find where the connection points are. And you can't do that as a person who doesn't give yourself room to study. You study the context. You study what you go into the streets. You talk to people in the streets. You learn the context and all of that. And so the third one is that you study the times. Though you might be aware of your context in Khayelitsha, but the times not only affect Khayelitsha, but they affect South Africa and the globe. There are changes in the times that you as a visionary leader need to keep up with. Because remember, visionary leaders are people who constantly seek to move ahead of their own times. Quite in fact, the interesting thing, when you pinpoint visionary leaders, they are always seen as people who are ahead of their times. Why? Because they study the times.
Yes.
They are not consumed by the times, but they study the times. And so then they are able to judge what the trends that are changing are going to be, where the movements are going to be, and so forth. So you always tend to find visionary leaders on the outskirts.
We thank you very much, Mfundisi. Mfundisi has told us to think out of the box and go out there. Thank you very much for listening and watching Kisima Radio, Heart to Heart Communication.